Hi, friends. I'm Chelsea Grayson. Welcome to another episode of What's Your Water? By way of brief introduction for those of you who are new to the show, I'm the former CEO of both American Apparel and True Religion. My guest today is Darrell Blocker. Darrell was a spy. Darrell, for 28 years, was a CIA agent, and during that time, he lived in 10 foreign countries. He is a subject matter expert on Iran, North Korea, and counterterrorism. He was chief of the Africa division.
Yes.
And at the time that Darrell exited the CIA, he was the most senior black CIA operative.
Yep.
And had an equivalent to a 3-star general credit, basically, right?
Right.
Am I saying that
Yes.
right? Ranking,
Right.
equivalent to a 3-star general ranking. So we're going to get into all of that as we get further into our conversation, but I'm very honored to have Darrell Blocker on What's Your Water. Welcome.
Not as honored as I am to be here, so thank you very much.
Thank you. So I want to get into a couple of basics before we really get into our conversation.
Okay.
I think the audience would benefit from a good explanation of the differences between the CIA and the FBI, you know, sort of purpose and mission, and also the scope of authority in the CIA versus the FBI.
Okay. The short answer is the CIA is an intelligence service. We do not have arrest authorities. We do not have, arrest and detain authorities, whereas FBI is law enforcement. FBI come knock on your door, you have to speak to them. CIA, you can say, I'm not interested in talking to you, and we'd have to figure out another way of doing it. So one is an intelligence service and one is law enforcement. CIA is primarily abroad, overseas. We do have a domestic presence within the clandestine service called National Resources, which is our domestic arm. And FBI is primarily domestic, even though they have a small presence abroad in embassies as well, through the form of what they call legal attaches or legats.
Mm-hmm. And you were actually the station chief of a domestic office. I won't say which one, but
Right. I was a station chief twice, once domestically and once in East Africa, yes.
okay. But I think people would be, I was interested to know, certainly when I met you,
Right.
that other than the Pentagon, which I think is where the CIA is headquartered officially.
No, CIA headquarters is in Langley, Virginia.
Langley,
North Langley,
okay.
yes.
I was interested to hear that there are other offices that the CIA has domestically here in the United States.
Right. It's not one of those things that we talk about a lot, but the National Resource Office actually even preceded the creation of the CIA. It was an office that became a part of the Office of Strategic Services, where General Donovan recognized that corporate America had an overseas presence. They had people who spoke languages. They had people who lived in and survived in foreign places, which at the time was Germany, Japan, and throughout Europe, and recognized that tapping into corporate America or industry was something that could be also a part of intelligence collection.
So how is it that you can speak with me today? I thought mostly spies were sort of like, I could tell you, but then I'd have to kill you.
Right.
Why are we able to have a conversation today?
We're able to have a conversation because when you come out from undercover, I was undercover for 28 years, and you can retire and continue to say, I was a State Department diplomat, and never reveal your CIA affiliation, but I knew that I was going to stay on the West Coast. I knew I wanted to be involved with creating original content that was going to be in the espionage genre, and in order to do that, I needed to come out and say that I am CIA and be able to do that with the blessings of CIA headquarters. So there's a process that you go through, and they go through your entire operational history, make sure that there's nothing out there that would endanger someone who's still around, someone that was in my CIA past. And once they've determined that the chances of someone being harmed or coming to the attention of whoever it was they were hiding their affiliation from, and so I got the approval to not be undercover. So now for 28 years, I never talked about CIA. And over the last year and a half since I retired, I only talk about CIA in forums like this for ABC News, The two firms that I work with, Mosaic, which is a intelligence and security agency, is tapping into the same skills that I used for 32 years. 4 years as an analyst in the military and 28 years with CIA. So intelligence officer for 32 years, more than 3 decades.
How'd you get into this line of work? So you were in the military, and
Yes.
then what made you switch to the CIA?
So
And how did that happen? And kind of tell me about your career path, over the 28 years that you were in and where it took you.
So it began by answering a newspaper ad. My then wife-to-be, who's now an ex-wife, 30 years, a lot of time has passed, sent me a newspaper clipping, and it had the CIA logo on it, and it said, do you want to travel the world? Do you want to see, new adventures? And having grown up in a military family, grown up in the Hill of the Boot, Italy, grown up in Okinawa, Japan, moving to Texas before my father retired when I was 11, I had that travel, that travel wanderlust, so to speak. But I had only done it or been around people who had done it in uniform, people who had done it in the military, and I saw an opportunity to continue to serve my country. I was a Cub Scout and a Boy Scout and ROTC in high school, ROTC in college. I was an Air Force officer myself, so the military is what I knew and understood. But doing it not in uniform and doing it in parts of the world that the military doesn't even go into was very attractive to me. And so I wrote a 1,500 word or less essay and they said, write on anything that you feel strongly about. And I wrote on the Palestinian-Israeli intifada at the time. And someone on the other end liked either the way I thought or the way I reasoned, and it started a process that probably over a year, there was a battery of tests that you have to take, psychological tests, medical tests, and what people think are the dreaded, polygraph in order to finally get the job offer on whether you want to stay in the military or you want to get out. And at that point in my life, I had done 4 years of high school, 4 years of college, 4 years of the Air Force, and it just made sense to let's go ahead and make this move now. So we threw a 4-month-old screaming boy into the back of a car, and we drove from Austin, Texas to Northern Virginia.
Wow.
And
your wife knew what was up? She knew
what was
sort
up.
of the job that you were taking?
She was the one that sent me the newspaper clipping.
Right, okay.
In the snail mail, so, that generation that doesn't know you can put a stamp on a piece of paper and send something, and it'll actually get there. And so, yeah, that was how it started, answering a newspaper ad.
Wow. And so how did you rise through the ranks? How did you get to live in all those different countries? I mean, what were your jobs as you sort of progressed through? So
when people think of the CIA based on popular books, TVs, and movies, they're only thinking about my directorate, the Directorate of Operations, which is a very small percentage of the entire body. So the people on my side of the house move every 2 to 3 years. We'll do an assignment in Argentina, and then we'll be in Uruguay, and then we'll be in Geneva, maybe back in Washington. So every 2 to 3 years, you're constantly moving. Whereas the other directorates, the Directorate of Science and Technology, the Directorate of Support, the Directorate of Analysis, and the Directorate of Digital Innovation are primarily people who are based in Washington with an opportunity maybe to do an assignment or two abroad. So I spent 80% of my career outside of the Washington, D.C. area, and most people spend 80% of their time in Washington. So the moving around for me, and I counted 22 moves between graduating college in '86 and moving into my place here in Southern California. 22 moves in 32 years. It's not for everybody.
Gosh.
It's hard. It was hard on the kids. It was hard on the marriage. It wasn't the only reason, but it didn't help.
Yeah.
And you get to a point where moving just isn't attractive anymore.
Yeah.
So I'm one more car in Southern California. I don't drive that much, so I'm not the one blocking up the road, but I'm not leaving. I love it here.
Yeah, I can't imagine you would. I mean, so what would happen? They would plunk you down in a place and sort of just say go, or I mean, would they let you know sort of what they were targeting, or let you know what they wanted to accomplish, or you know, and then what about the language that was spoken in that country? Kind of talk to me about the micro details of when you would get to a place.
So the process is, when you come into the agency, you spend about 2 years in what we call the training pipeline. So you'll spend 3 or 4 months covering African issues, and 3 or 4 months covering counterproliferation issues, 3 or 4 months covering, you know, Latin American issues, just to get a feel for how the different subcultures within the CIA operate. And we operate through a series of offices called stations and bases, and they're manned by cross directorates, so mostly people from the clandestine side of the house, but you have to have the support, you have to have all the others that are serving out there as well. So during that 2-year process, you're getting acclimated to the real CIA, not the CIA that you thought it was based on what you knew from popular culture. And then they go down to a training facility and they certify in the course or not. So that's 2 years after you've pushed that button.
Okay.
From the time you push that button to when you certify could be 2 or 3 years. Your motivations may have changed. Your reasons for joining the agency may have changed. You might be getting into a relationship and, oh my God, I'm not in the same place that I was when I pushed the button 2 or 3 years ago. But most people recognize that it's a long game, and they understand through the hiring process that the expectations are you will go wherever in the world the agency needs you to go. So you're going to miss funerals, you're going to miss weddings, you're going to miss birthdays, you're going to miss, and there's a possibility, and I know someone who's missed all of the above. I didn't miss either of my kids' births. I was lucky enough to be there. But I did spend a lot of time without them. I spent time, the longest, of course, was a year when I was in Pakistan. But I also spent 3 months in Burundi after the Hutu-Tutsi massacres. I spent a month and a half in Mogadishu, Somalia, in the aftermath of the Black Hawk Down, and then short trips away for training or for an actual operational mission. And it's tough on the kids because they didn't know where Dad was. They just know Dad was with the embassy and gone for X period of time. So the moving is not the hard part because it's exciting. In fact, every 2 to 3 years you kind of get that itch, like, oh, where am I going next?
Yeah.
And on the language front, so a lot of people come in with language. I grew up speaking Japanese, but of course, when I moved from Japan to Texas, the Japanese population dipped significantly.
Yeah.
But language, I learned French, and I took 6 months of French. That was my job, 8 hours a day, to do nothing but French.
Just immersion.
Total immersion, including time living in France with a French family and going to school there, and that's towards the end of the language program. So we teach our people whatever language of the country that they're going into. Some, not every country, because it just depends, but for the most part, if we're going to send someone out to a place where they need to be able to survive, because English is just an impossibility, then of course we train them to speak that language.
And so you had to learn how to speak French because you were being sent to Africa, I assume, right? Okay.
I spent time in 3 francophone countries in Africa: Niger, Senegal, and Morocco. And then Switzerland was my last overseas assignment.
And so did your family have to learn to speak that language as well? I mean, how did they survive once they had boots on the ground too. They pretty much came everywhere with you except for Pakistan, I think you said earlier, right?
Correct. The kids, well, all 3 of them are French speakers. Yeah. So I think my daughter's French might be the best. She refused to ever speak French with her dad. But I've been around her and her girlfriends, and they're all talking, and I'll come in, I'll say something, and they'll all switch to English. I'm like, what? I know my French is not that good, but is it really that bad? But yeah, they actually enjoyed it. Maybe Josiah didn't enjoy it, but it was fun being in different places and figuring out Because a lot of the times the people that you're dealing with in Senegal, say, it's their second or third language as well. Because Wolof is probably going to be their primary spoken in the home language, or maybe Hausa, depending on what part of the country you lived in. And so French, yes, it is their national language, but it's not their language, it's not their maternal tongue. And they're a little, let's just say they're willing to understand that it's not mine either, and deal with the fact that I sound like a country Georgia boy learning how to speak French. Tu dis que tu aimes des oiseaux and tu les mets en cage. You know, there's a whole bunch of, I won't even get into that. So it's a famous poem that my French teacher was trying to help the fluency and the way it was delivered. So she started teaching poetry to us as well. And there's some fantastic poems out there, and passé composé, and just the different types of.
Tu parles français très bien, monsieur.
Je parle français, oui. Un peu.
So I'm going to digress for a little bit, because other than language immersion, I'm recalling something that you said to me the first time we met. You might not guess it out there, but Darrell's Jewish. That's not really where I was going, but that's the start of this anecdote.
Okay.
I kind of want you to talk about how you became Jewish, but the real point of this is, but when you go to a place, you know, you talked about immersing yourself in that place where you were in Muslim countries, and you observed Ramadan and other Muslim religions. I mean, how does that work? You know, sort of how do you, does that create an inner conflict for you, or is that just faking it? Is it all tradecraft, or do you have to really be so authentic about it that you sort of take that on?
For me, it was genuinely wanting to learn what it, I mean, you hear about Ramadan, and you can't really understand it unless you're fasting. And fasting for, you know, Yom Kippur for a day is not like fasting for 28 to 30 days. And let me tell you, it ain't easy. In fact, the first time I did was in Niamey, Niger, which is a very, very hot country. And I think I only made it about a third of the way through. I think I made it to 10 or 11, and the nurse at the embassy is like, you need to stop. We appreciate what you're doing, but you're going to hurt yourself. Because they grew up doing it their whole lives, and I'm just coming in wanting to acculturate, wanting to, you know, show that the people, because there are Nigerian who are working in the embassy, and of course that we're in all the markets and everything, and when they see that you're trying, and I didn't wear my Jewishness on my sleeve. In fact, I didn't convert until I moved to Los Angeles. But
so recently?
No, yes, out of the American Jewish University off of Mulholland. But I've identified as Jewish since college. There was no conflict with Judaism and following Ramadan, because I was raised Baptist in the South, and for me, the parallels between them, and it's the same. Abraham, same guy. We all claim the same forefather or founding father, and yet the divide is what it is today. It's not as bad as it was in the biblical days, but it's certainly not where it should be.
So it sort of brings me to my next question, and I guess answer this as fulsome as you possibly can, but I understand there's things you can't talk about. I mean, there's a lot of tradecraft you can't talk about, obviously, but sort of generally, I mean, so you talk about, you know, you would practice Ramadan, and that would make you seem at least more genuine or more heartfelt to your assets, I guess, if that's the right word, that you were developing in those places. I mean, how would you'd set boots down in a place, would you have been told already who potential assets were? Would you have to figure that out? And then once you meet an asset, can you talk generally about the process of developing the asset, and would they know who you were right away, or would you have to ease into that conversation? I mean, kind of how would a relationship with an asset go, kind of from soup to nuts, and when do you know it's over?
It is very much like dating. In fact, your job is to connect with that person, and that person is not really, the person is identified just in the sense of, let me back up. The analogy that realtors understand, the importance of good realtors, location, location. In the world of espionage, it's access, access, access. So what we're looking at is a piece of information that our government wants to know something about, and then you look at that access, who has access to that information. That determines who's of interest to you. And then it's up to us, because they train us to go out and be able to make connections with people, is, okay, Chelsea is the only person that has access to this information. She doesn't know you from Adam. You need to figure out some way to engage with her in a way that she's going to want to have a second meeting. And then, of course, over the period of, you know, days, weeks, and months, and sometimes even years, you get to know that person, you get to trust that person, and eventually you pop the question. And the question, no, it is. And the question is, you know, basically, here's what I need you to do, and here's why, and I would never put you in harm's way. And I truly meant that. You know, it's not always easy to live up to, you know, not putting people in harm's way, because it's a dangerous world. But I never asked anybody to do anything for me that I wouldn't have done, you know, done myself. So it is done over long periods of time, and that person just gets to see you as, it's trust. It boils down to trust. And people don't always see spying as a trustworthy endeavor, but if you look at the Bible, there's no judgment on Joshua and Caleb or anything when it comes to spy stories. In fact, there was no even judgment on Rahab, who is the second, and I can get into spy stories in the Bible, but we won't go there, because there are quite a few. But the shirt that I decided to wear today is, there's an adage that says espionage is the second oldest profession, but less reputable than the first.
You all know what the first is, right?
Right. So, and I can tell you in 32 years in the business that people thought less of me being in CIA than if I had, you know, been selling my body on the street corner. Yeah. They think more highly of the harlot Rahab than they did of Joshua and Caleb for what they did.
Because there's this perception of deception.
Right.
You're right. It's the opposite of trust.
It
right.
is.
It's this whole idea that actually you're not to be trusted because you're somebody completely different from who you say you are, right? Or you're manipulating people to get something that.
But we all manipulate people. And I think manipulation has only negative connotations, where I've used manipulation in a way that it was my job to convince you or whoever it was I was talking to that my interests were your interest as well. And a lot of times you see that, and of course you're pushing them, you know, in that direction. But at the end of the day, blackmailing someone or coercing someone to do something doesn't work. The Russians do it, the Chinese try to do it. We did it over, you know, long periods of time, but not in the time that I was there, because it's simply, it's counterproductive. So getting someone to trust you means that person knows you as a family person, they know you as a work person, and then eventually you're getting whatever tidbits. And a lot of people say no. So when do you know when it's over? When that person looks at you and says, you know what, that's the only reason you ever came into my life, wasn't it? And I've had someone ask me that question, and that's a hard question. And this was a man whose kids I knew, and his youngest was almost the age of my daughter, and he was my heart. He was just a fantastic little kid. And I told him, I said, yes and no. And I was able to explain to him why I originally went after him, which wasn't the reason why I ended up recruiting him, but you're dealing with people's lives, and you're dealing with people's trust, but I'm able to convince them, and I'm able to tell them and mean it truly in my heart and be authentic, that I would never do anything that's going to jeopardize you or your wife or your kids or anything, because what you're looking at is what they already have access to. I'm not sending you into a place where you have no reason to be there. I'm sending you in because you're already in there, and I need you to bring out, whether it's in your head or whether it's in a electronic file, or if it's a paper file. You're there. That access is already there. I'm not forcing you into anything. I've just identified that you have access to the information we need, and you are my best chance of getting to that information.
But don't people get themselves into sticky situations? I mean, they're getting you whatever information you need. Does anybody ever get into a sticky situation where they're discovered, you know, by the ultimate target, right? And
Yes.
so while they're attempting to deliver it to you, or even afterwards, or you know, come close to getting the target or something, and your source is
Right.
exposed. I mean, again, within the bounds of what you can talk about,
Right.
have you seen that happen, and have you seen that happen in a bad way? Has that negatively impacted people?
In the post 9/11 world, a lot more people that were willing to work for us ended up dying, because you're dealing with bombs and guns and people whose only purpose in life is to take life. So those guys are an anomaly just in our 70-plus year history. It is a relationship between, and it's an intimate, not intimate in the terms of sexual intimacy, but it's a very intimate thing to ask someone to betray. And that's what they're doing, is they're betraying the country that they live in. They're betraying the company that they work for, the tribe that they're born into, whatever it happens to be. But you also know that that tribe doesn't always have your best interest. So that government looks at you as, you know, being from the wrong side of the tracks, or you are in a country where being a LGBTQ is akin to basically a death sentence.
Right.
So finding those people, finding folks who feel underappreciated, who feel marginalized, who feel like no one is ever listening to them. You know, people have asked me what's my superpower, and I think it's listening. And learning how to listen was actually a very painful process for me, because men are not the best listeners. And I was 14 years into a marriage before that, you know, that was thrown in my face, and not thrown in my face by my ex, but thrown in my face by the people who gave me 360 feedback after an assignment in which I served. And of course, I did great, you know, fantastic job, until I got the feedback and I realized that I was a micromanager, that I was compared to, Pol Pot, Genghis Khan, Hitler, Stalin,
Hitler.
you know, whatever the worst possible leaders that you can think of, I was compared to them, and it was painful. And learning about it was painful, because on paper, everything that we did was, in fact, we won a lot of awards during that time frame, when we won them because we grew a program from nothing, and it was a sight to behold by the time we left out of there. But I rode a lot of people hard, and I rode a lot of people the wrong way, and it showed in my feedback. And I knew that if I didn't change my ways, that my goal of getting to a GS-15, which is a full bird colonel, and that was my goal coming in.
Which you surpassed.
Which I surpassed. There are no stars at CIA, but it's equivalent to a 3-star general, which is still kind of mind-boggling to me. And that was 2009 when I got that, so that was 11 years ago already. So I think I'm moving away from the original question.
Yeah, no, we were just sort of, I mean, you got into something I was going to ask you about anyways, which is what would be somebody's incentive or motivation for connecting with you, but you sort of got there. So then kind of moving past that, you know, other than somebody just sort of saying no right up front, right? Once you've gone through the relationship with someone and you kind of got what you came for, right? You got what you need. Again, we're back to relationship lingo now, but
No,
but you got what you came for.
Right.
So then how, and let's say you got your target or you didn't or whatever it is, but the relationship's over. How do you back out of that relationship now? How do you terminate? Because often you're moving to a different country anyways, right? You're probably never going to see them again. It wouldn't be appropriate.
Right.
How do you do that? How does that work?
It's tough, and you'll have, let's just say we're in a developmental relationship and you and I have connected, and now I'm about to leave, you're staying in the country in the same job, and I'm going to introduce you to another officer trained just like I am, who's going to handle you and make sure that they protect you and keep you from harm's way. Well, you didn't buy into that. I said I would do whatever I could for you, Darrell, but my job is to pass that on and make sure that it's done not for Darrell, but if not CIA, then at least the U.S. government, so they can recognize that it's a business relationship, it's a personal relationship that is kind of morphed into a business relationship. And people walk away all the time, and there's nothing that you can do about that. But to terminate is not like it is in Hollywood, obviously, but terminate is, listen, we've come to a place where your interest and my interest aren't aligned anymore, or you know, we're not following this particular issue as closely as we were before, and basically, if you change your phone number, let us know, but don't call us, we'll call you, type of thing. So backing out of the relationship is kind of tough, and I actually learned how to terminate before I learned how to recruit. So
that's not a euphemism for kill.
Right,
He's talking about just ending the relationship.
It is not ending the relationship. Thank you very much.
It's not terminating anyone.
So the measure of success in the DO is being able to have new business development, being able to recruit new sources. I didn't recruit in my first tour. I didn't recruit in my second tour. So by all measures, I was a failed case officer.
Yeah.
But I learned a lot, and I learned more about the overall workings of the agency and stuff that when you're at the lower level, you don't need to be worrying about budgets and liaison. And liaison is the relationship between our station and the host government. And the host government could be, you know, pick one, Switzerland. So the relationship between the Swiss CIA and the CIA in country is what we call a liaison relationship.
Okay.
But because I was undercover, I'm not going to be exposed to the liaison. Once you get up to chief or deputy chief, then yes, you're exposed to the government. But mostly they're shielding the fact that we have other officers in country doing the work. And every country, every intel service on the planet does the same thing. This isn't any CIA secrets. There's library books out there full of it. It's just that protecting that unilateral is the most important thing. And it's not that, these aren't war zones are life and death, but most things are not. Most things are, what can we find out about the Iranian position on this issue, and no one's going to lose a life. Of course, they don't want you to have it, which is why it's secret, but we're not asking people to, to blow up the Iranian nuclear facility.
Right. But yet and still, sure, I mean, you're not a soldier, right? You're not shooting at people or anything like that. But I mean, talk to me about the danger that was involved in the work. I mean, you are asking about what the Iranian position is on something, or what it is they're thinking, right? I mean, somebody in the Iranian government is not going to want you to know that. There's a reason why they're not just, you can't just walk up to the door and say, hey, can you give me your position on this, right? That's why we're spying about this, you know? So, I mean, are you constantly watching your back? Did you carry a weapon? Any of these questions, if you can't answer, let me know. I mean, did it get dangerous? Did it get physical at times? Were there times where you were concerned?
I never felt like I was in danger in any place that I was outside of, Mogadishu was dangerous. Yeah. This was literally 2 months after Black Hawk Down. The government, meaning the United States government, Bill Clinton had just come to power and said one of his first acts was, we're pulling out of Somalia. And it basically gave the bad guys a timeline of when we were leaving. We were supposed to be out by the 31st of March. So the last 3 months were probably the most dangerous outside of that one, 8 to 10 hour episode that people know as Black Hawk Down. I got shot at there. I never take it personally. I carried a weapon. It's the only place I ever carried a weapon was in Somalia, and during my time in the war zone. But we don't carry weapons anywhere else in the world. People think because of movies that CIA people are walking around like FBI guys with bulletproof vest and guns. No, this was my weapon, and there's literally no situation that I haven't been able to talk myself out of. I mean, rolling up on roadblocks in Africa where you have child soldiers between 8 and 12 years old who are clearly stoned out of their mind and handling weapons, and they're walking up to the car, and they're no joke. Yes, they're children, but they will put a bullet in you just as quickly as anybody else. So
quicker probably there because they're more nervous.
Right, and you just learn. I never traveled anywhere where I didn't have like a pack of cigarettes or a pack of gum or soccer balls. There's something about soccer balls when you're in third world countries. You blow up a soccer ball and bring it out, it changes everything. I mean, literally I've seen scenarios where it could have gone really, really badly, and just pulling out a soccer ball and people they just change. And it's something about just being prepared and knowing, what that threat's going to be. Now, you could roll up at the wrong time and get shot, but my job was not to go in and coerce people. My job was to go in and convince people. And to convince them, meaning you have to sit down and drink tea with them or eat some really bad food, because sometimes it was really bad food. But they're just people at the end of the day. Even the worst of the folks that I've seen over the years, and I've seen some bad people, they all have hopes and dreams and fears just like everybody else, and that's what I would always try to focus on. I'd ask them about what was their favorite poem, what was their favorite musician, what was their favorite movie, and these terrorists were just looking at you like, I've never had anybody ask me these questions. But I honestly, truly wanted to know, because when you know what drives someone, whether it's the type of books that they read, it matters, and it matters to them, and it changes hearts.
Yeah.
I saw hearts change.
Did you?
I did.
That gives me some optimism.
Good.
But turning to another negative subject.
They're not negative to me. This is my world for a long time. So.
I mean, there's Taliban, there's ISIS, there's Al Qaeda,
Right.
there's Boko Haram. I mean, you just sort of made a veiled reference to Boko Haram, I think.
Yep.
You've been in all of these hotspots, right? You're a subject matter expert on some of the scariest places, Iran and North Korea. In fact, you and I started talking at a dinner party because we had just shot a very important person in Iran, or
Right.
blew him up, and
Right.
that was a hot topic of the night, and you knew more about it than anybody else.
And actually, I was on KABC 7
Earlier that day, that's
that
right.
day, talking about the Soleimani strike.
Yeah. What are the hot spots that you're most nervous about now? Or what are the groups that make you the most concerned now? What keeps you awake at night?
So I'm of the General Mattis kind of mindset when it comes to that. I've never let anybody keep me up at night. My job is to keep them up worrying about where I'm going to be. I don't do that anymore, of course, and I didn't think about it like that at the time, but you can't go through life as an intelligence officer worrying about, oh my God, is this going to happen or that's going to happen. We move in, we do what we need to do, and get out as cleanly as you can. The perfect operation is one where you don't even realize it happened, and there's no fingerprint left behind, and things just change, and all of a sudden, like, well, how did that happen? We want people to wonder how we did it, because it means they're not thinking about how to stop us in the moment.
Interesting.
It's like sleight of hand.
Yeah. Okay, that was a good way of not answering my question, by the way. That was great.
No, stop. Ask it again. I'll answer anything.
No, if you can't, you can't, because
No,
I know there's a lot of stuff that's out of bounds, and I just didn't write any of that stuff down. I just figured I'd ask. But
I get off on tangents. Ask your question again.
Where should we, just as a general population?
Where should we be concerned?
Where should we be thinking about? What are the groups? Because I think a lot. Just because you raised it, I wasn't planning on asking you this,
right.
but your sort of reference to Boko Haram, right?
Yes.
People don't focus on that as a terrorist organization as much as they do on the things that impact us here, or they perceive to impact us here, right? ISIS right now, I think, is probably on the top of everyone's mind.
Absolutely, and it should be.
But Boko Haram is terrorizing an entire continent, to my understanding anyways. I don't know much about it. We don't hear a lot about it. So what, and maybe that's not the thing that concerns you the most, but what, from a global perspective, is a hot spot that you'd be concerned about?
So Syria and Iraq is going to be an issue for a long time. Iraq has at least been open to dealing with the West and dealing with the United States. Syria is not. Syria is, clearly in Russia's camp. I guess what concerns me most is we got, like after the Soviets pulled out of Afghanistan in 1989. So 1979 was the invasion of the Soviet invasion into Afghanistan. 1989 is when they pulled out. So you had an entire decade of hardened fighters who had been in and out of this war for a long time, who couldn't go back to Egypt afterwards because the Egyptians were like, well, they don't think any more about our government than they do about the government in there. So all these people were left without some place to go. We look at the ISIS camps and the women and children and the fighters that are in them. Eventually, they're going to have. You can't just hold people forever. Guantanamo, you can't hold anyone forever.
Right.
And at some point, are you making it worse by not allowing people to fester in these camps? And I've seen refugee camps in the African continent. I've seen them in the Middle East, and I've seen them in Southwest Asia. And they are breeding grounds for, bad things to happen. Whereas if you went in and provided education, if you went in and provided sanitation, if you went in and provided hospitals, if you went in and took care of the people the same way ISIS was doing in Syria, ISIS stepped in and filled a void where the Syrian government wasn't taking care of its own people. So if you got a terrorist group that's coming in and taking care of administratively, now doing horrible, horrible things, but they won the hearts and minds of the people in the areas, the enclaves which they moved. Those pockets, of course, have been broken down, and now they're dispersed.
Right.
But where are those people going back to? They're going back to Belgium and Canada and the United States and, North Africa. They're going back home. Some of them won't get back into the business, but there'll be enough of them that will. So those guys scare me.
That's a scary answer because they're all dispersed.
It is a scary answer.
There's not one place where they all are. To your point, they're all going back to wherever it was they came from.
And during the Soviets' day, you knew a Soviet military guy when you saw them because they were in a uniform.
Right.
There's no one carrying a card that says ISIS, Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, or anything like that. They know who each other are, and we know because we track them. Yeah. But to the general public, they look just like anybody else.
Yeah.
And they're taking advantage of that as well.
Wow, okay.
Yep.
Sort of along those lines, I read something about you that in 2014, you managed the intelligence community's response to the Ebola outbreak.
It was, yeah.
I'm just curious. Well, I want to hear about that because Ebola, that actually did keep me up a lot at night when that happened. But I kind of want to hear about that experience through the lens of how you perceive coronavirus, for lack of a better way of characterizing it, and sort of what you think is happening there.
It was the CIA's response to the Ebola virus, which is mostly we lead the intel community for overseas, so it's not the only person that was involved. We were looking at it in the sense that the Ebola crisis was causing already weak governments to possibly topple, whereas the people who were, anti-government or who wanted to rise up were going to use the Ebola crisis as a way to destabilize. And once one country falls, we've seen the domino effect everywhere else. So the Ebola virus in and of itself was not really the target. It was what's going to be the ramifications if we don't go in and do this. So our analysts are the best on the planet. They're dealing with people in the World Health Organization, with CDC, with other intelligence services that are collecting in the area as well. And it's a team sport. It's not just CIA out there. Where CIA is working with our British colleagues and our French and German and Swahili and Swaziland or wherever it happens to be. We're doing it side by side with other folks who have scientists and doctors and remedies for trying to figure out how to deal with this. The difference between Ebola virus crisis in the 14-15 time frame and what's going on now is the disinformation that people who just want to keep everybody unsettled, the Putins of the world, the Russians of the world, are putting bad information out there. And, you know, this whole fake news thing is a real problem, because once people start questioning the efficacy and the utility and the truthfulness of, you know, of the media, things can go terribly, terribly awry. And I've seen that on the African continent. The first thing in a coup, and I think in my 28 years at CIA, there were 43 coups in Africa during the time that I was in. I counted them at one point. There was a lot of them.
God.
So once you're dealing with it, you know what to look for. First thing they do is they take over the radio stations. They take over the airports. They take over anything that has to do with you know, being able to reach out massively to people. And they start isolating them and quarantining them. I don't see anybody being able to quarantine the entire United States. We're just so different in who we are. The South is not the Midwest, is not the Northeast, is not, you know, can you imagine running around in Arkansas trying to tell somebody that they're going to have to give up their guns? No. It's not going to happen.
But by the way, by way of distinction,
right,
China was able to quarantine an
entire
what they
city.
called village or city, which had multi-millions. I think it was over 10 million people are in that city, and they're still quarantined.
Wuhan, yes.
Wuhan, right? So that shows you the stark difference between our two
Huge
countries,
difference.
you know?
Because imagine if somebody, LA is, I don't know how many millions live here in LA, but trying to quarantine Los Angeles.
Even just Santa Monica.
Right. People would lose their minds. And it would be a fight. It would be a flat out fight.
Yeah.
And
the only way you could do it is if you said, all right, you never have to cross the 405 again. And people would probably self-quarantine themselves. Okay, great. I'll stay east, I'll stay west.
That is funny. Oh, man. Yeah.
So switching gears a little bit.
Okay.
The other thing I learned about you the night that I met you at that crazy dinner party, which was like an Illuminati dinner party, sort of.
It was actually cool.
It was a very cool
cool.
party,
Yep.
yeah. Was that you sing. You're a very good singer.
I do. Well, I don't know about very good, but singing was my first love. Absolutely love singing. I don't play any instruments, so this is literally the only instrument that I have. And 4th grade all the way through University of Georgia Men's Glee Club and 2 bands, one in Senegal, one in Uganda, and so
you were the front man for a band traveling, like you toured in Uganda, right? You were
yes, yeah.
I mean, so this is like, don't laugh. I mean, you did this almost professionally in some ways.
It was so different because these were real musicians. So Jim was a Berklee School of Music trained guitarist, and his wife was working for USAID, which is our Agency for International Development, and he was a musician. So he found 2 Congolese and 2 Ugandans, and he started a jazz band. And I would go listen to him every Sunday night at it was the only American-owned bar and restaurant in Kampala.
Hey, wait, can I interrupt you on that one for a second,
Yes.
though? So it's a bunch of, State Department, USAID, at least one CIA guy in there. I mean, and it's the only American.
I was the only one from the embassy that was in the band.
How did you guys all not get exposed as being just like, that's the Americans, that's the bar that they hang out, we know not to hang out with them and let's attack it or something.
So,
and then we'll get back to the singing, but I mean.
So when you're undercover, nobody knows that I'm CIA outside of the embassy.
Yeah.
The ambassador knows, the DCM, who's the deputy chief of mission, so the number 2, the political counselor, all the people who are the heads of whatever offices, they're aware of who I am and how I'm different. And their job is to protect that from people who don't need to know that, including they used to call them foreign service nationals, but now they're locally employed staff. So basically the people of the country that you live in. They don't need to know that I'm CIA. They don't need to know anything about that. So when they see me out in town, they just see, Darrell from the embassy.
Right. He runs HR at the embassy.
Right.
Yeah.
And so singing with the band I just enjoyed going to hear them play. And then my ex, not, without my permission or my knowledge, made a tape of like 15 to 20 songs that she knew I loved to sing, gave it to the band.
She made you a reel.
Right. And the band learned the songs. Before they came to me and said, do you want to sing? And I was like, I'm like, no. We know these songs. And it was a whole bunch of Counting Crows. There was
well, you've got your signature song.
Stevie Wonder. Yeah, I would end my set with "What a Wonderful World," which is just such an amazing song, and one that I love, and I've sang it a lot of times. But is this going where I think it's going?
Well, I was going to ask you to sing, but maybe that's how we'll end all of this. But you're not off the hook yet, because I'm going to get back to spying.
Okay.
Did you ever use your singing, or sort of when you traveled to different places? Was that ever sort of part of your tradecraft? Was that part of your cover? Did it help you gain an audience with people, or was that just completely social and you were allowed to have a personal life and totally different from your work?
It was a little of both. It was all social for about a year and a half, and then I met someone in one of the bars that I probably would not have met otherwise, just because we ran in different circles, and that evolved into a good relationship that was both personal and professional.
That's one of the places we probably can't talk about. Before I let you go, I also want to completely switch gears, because you do something else that's so marvelous that I have such deep respect for. You are on the board of Peace for Kids.
I am.
Which is a beautifully, incredibly charitable organization.
Yes.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
So my daughter is a social worker in Chicago, and she was visiting in the fall of 15, and she said, well, Dad, you said when you got to LA you were going to find some way to give back, so what have you done? And I went on for about 2 or 3 minutes about all the research I had done and people I had met and talked to, and then she said, oh, so you really haven't done anything yet? And I was like, stabbed at the heart. But a month later, I did the orientation for Peace for Kids, which is out of the Watts Willowbrook Boys and Girls Club, Saturday program, and it was love at first sight. I was so amazed with the program, with the staff, with the volunteers. So I'm now been volunteering for 4 years, and I got elected to the board last February. So I'm just last March. So I'm just completing 1 year on the board. And what it is, it's we deal with youth in the foster system, as you're aware. So I needed that. I'd lost my father about 3 weeks before I started volunteering.
I'm sorry.
And it was just one of those, I needed something. I started with Peace for Kids. I started the American Jewish University program that I did for 6 months. So I immersed myself into making sure that 7 days a week I was doing something. Saturday was Peace for Kids. Sunday was the AJU Jewish course. And of course, Monday through Friday was work. So for about 7 or 8 months, that's what I did nonstop. And it was good for me. It was cathartic. I was able to not think about my pop so much. And I found Peace for Kids out of it. And a year after that is when I did my Beit Din with the rabbis and the mikveh and the whole process. And it was a beautiful time for me in my life, and I'm glad I did it.
Yeah. Do you feel like you're more at peace now than you have been after jumping around to all those different places and constantly being?
I am. Happiness is so underrated.
Yeah.
And I'm happy. I'm happy at where I am. I'm happy at how things are starting to kind of materialize here, because it's scary going from knowing a check is going to drop every 2 weeks for 32 years. I never had to worry about anything.
Hustling for business.
Never had, never. Now, I mean, I
okay,
hustle
now
for business.
you're downplaying yourself, because before I let you go, so you're also the Chief Operating Officer at Mosaic, which is a high-level strategic advisory firm that focuses on corporate security, right?
Yes.
And I'm not talking about security guards. I'm talking about high-level, anti-hacking, right? anti sort of terrorism or act of God, you know, sort of events that can happen to a corporation. So you're the COO there.
Correct.
You are writing a screenplay, I think.
I'm writing a couple of stories with
Writing a book
with my
also.
girlfriend, who's a creative, a writer, and an actor.
So I can't wait to see that. And before I let you go, I'm going to tell my favorite anecdote about you, which is that when we were meeting to prep for this interview, and we were sort of texting back and forth and figuring out where we were going to meet. And so we figured it all out and the time and everything. And I said, all right, I'll see you then. And you just wrote back cryptically, not if I see you first. I was like, that is the ultimate in that's just that. Then I had a nickname for you behind the scenes, which is Master of Espionage. So Master of Espionage, Darrell Blocker, tell us where people can find you. You're not on Instagram. He's very covert.
I'm not.
But you're on LinkedIn.
I'm on LinkedIn.
If people want to know more about you.
Yes, LinkedIn, Darrell M. Blocker.
Okay.
You can reach me through Mosaic website, which is just how it sounds. MosaicSEC.com. Mosaic Security is what that's short for. ABC News. There's clips out there from Good Morning America. There's a couple of other podcasts. You know, I did this series of 3 events at the International Spy Museum just last week. The Spycast dropped today, and the video of the presentation that I did a week ago tomorrow was also dropped today. And then I did an outreach to 8 to 12th grade kids across the nation. We had someone from Vienna and Michigan and New York. So yeah, I'm getting out there, and the message that I'm trying to give is that whatever you think you know about the CIA, please keep in mind that whatever community you happen to come from, and I'm thinking about an opportunity that I had during Hurricane Sandy. I was speaking to 600 HBCU students that got caught up in the hotel, and I was the keynote speaker for this week-long event. And of course, the black community doesn't always have a very high regard for the CIA. And what I explained to them was, well, the black community doesn't always get the best of press either. And that, got a lot of, I said, well, just consider the possibility that the things that you see that are wrong about what's being reported in your community has been reported wrong in my community as well. And I actually saw some folks that were nodding their head like, okay, I just want you to know that I'm not an anomaly. I really am, just like so many of the other people that I served with for 30 years who are just decent, good, hardworking people who only want to do the work, don't want any recognition, and are looking to counter, what is just all negative. Yeah. And I love espionage shows. I love Homeland. I love Fauda. I loved Alias when it was on. I love those shows because they're so not CIA. Yeah. And but they're entertaining and they're fun, and I want to make good TV that are about relationships between husbands and wives, fathers and daughters, mothers and daughters, whatever it happens to be, the same thing that you guys are dealing with, elder care, kids not listening, slamming doors, whatever it happens to be. Trust me, it's happening to somebody at CIA. We're just people, who, and being out the way I am, coming out was not so painful because I had a year and a half to actually process and think about what I wanted to do. Right. So yes, I'm doing some writing, and I've got an angel investor and a manager now.
Fancy.
I have an entertainment lawyer.
Oh man.
I have actually
he's really out now.
I know, it's a little. I've gone Hollywood. It's a little scary, but if nothing ever happens, that's fine too, because I didn't have any of that before, but I grew up singing and dancing and acting, and I'm just coming full circle.
Right.
That's all it is.
Well, you've got good stuff to talk about on camera.
I certainly do.
Again, it's been my privilege and my honor to have you on the show. This has been so fascinating. I hope you guys have all learned something about this. I certainly have. Thank you for being so open and honest with me.
Always.
And I'll see you at that party that we're heading to in a couple of weeks.
Fantastic.
Yeah, thank
All
you.
right.
Thanks, Darrell.
Thank you
Darrell
very much.
Blocker. All right.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone. Thanks. And tune
Thank
in
you.
for the next episode of What's Your Water?